term as a member of the board. So for those of you who don't know, this is the 20th year at the 20th anniversary of the neighborhood council system, which according to popular legend was founded to keep the San Fernando Valley from seceding from the city of Los Angeles. I have a different view. I think that it's also part of one of the real benefits that we got in the aftermath of the '92 uprising. Anything that helps to facilitate interaction between local groups and their local government, I think, is a good thing. But however, like anything that involves human beings, there's everything that you could think of. There's cronyism, there's factionalism, all of those bad things. It comes with the territory. The best part about neighborhood councils for me has been the work on committees. And that's actually where I would encourage anyone who's interested in being in a neighborhood council to start with. Pick the thing you're most passionate about and work with that committee. That's how you get to see how the board works. And that's where you get to do the real work, for me, which is the most rewarding, which is the frontline stuff of helping your neighbors. One of the benefits, the other benefits of neighborhood councils is that you get a budget that you can spend for micro grants or large grants within your neighborhood. And you also become a powerful advocate, as we have, for things that your neighborhood needs improving. It can take a while, but you know, we did get that really important, after several accidents, stoplight. Saved a lot of people's limbs that way. We've been able to help people fill in potholes. We've been able to, I think the most important initiative that I've worked on is that we were able to, after a year and a half of intense lobbying and dealing with the bureaucracy, get a mobile shower in our neighborhood for our local homeless, unhoused neighbors, many of them who are living in the rough in Echo Park Lake. Not in the lake, actually, but you know what I mean. And around that, we built services. We call them auxiliary services. So, for example, I was in charge of the hot food service. We had a donated housing service. We had homeless healthcare came every day, once a week with us to make sure that people got their intake interviews, which, if you know, that puts them in line to get housing. We had, before COVID closed us down, we had a registered nurse come by and do checkups on folks. Phone charging, all the things that we could think of, we built around that service. And I was really proud of the work that we were doing before COVID closed us down. So that's what I have to say. If anybody wants to get into it, really look to the committees. That's the hardcore work. And that helps you get used to some of the other things that come with being on a neighborhood council. As an organizing tool, the infrastructure is already there. And I think it is right for us to really get progressives moving on the things that we care about. Because I'll tell you one thing, if we're not there, the opposition will be.
And Lauren, I guess just to continue, because you were talking about your experience getting involved with the committee, how did you come to the council? What's kind of your personal story? What brought you to?
So I've been an activist all my adult life. Most of my organizing training has been with unions, and I decided to get even more involved with my neighborhood. So what I did was I joined the Outreach and Communications Committee first and helped to get a subset started that was directly dealing with immigrants, because most of my not most, but a significant number of my neighbors are immigrants. And indeed, the district that I represent is where Churla is housed, which does magnificent work with helping immigrants secure their rights. That was my passion, but it also gave me a taste of how things can get bogged down and it become inert. And then, you know, I was just committed to continuing on with that work. And for me, the natural outgrowth were the things that I'm most passionate about. One is outreach beyond the people who serve on the board. You know, the working class folks who are largely unaware that neighborhood councils exist. My immigrant neighbors who don't know they have the right to vote and serve on their neighborhood councils. And the young people that I'd like to help mentor and get ready for public service. All of these things were important to me, so I naturally gravitated to those committees that helped me get more involved with those things that are my advocacy priorities.
Thank you. And I guess, yeah, Eryn, how did you get involved with your neighborhood council, and how does your experience, how has that changed your advocacy priorities, or how have you sought as a way to achieve them?
I'm really glad to be on this call with Lauren too. I've learned a lot from her already. Thank you so much for what you've said so far. I definitely echo what she said. So first, to give a little bit of structure to the neighborhood council system in someone's brain, if you're like totally unaware of it, neighborhood councils um, don't exist in most cities. It's pretty unique to have neighborhood councils. They exist in DC, like slightly in New York, and maybe a couple other places, but it is very unique. And it is partly because of the small amount of city council members that we have in relation to our population of the city. And there are 99, I think, neighborhood councils currently active in the city of LA, and they are just in the city. So like I'm in Palms, but right across Venice from me, Culver City has a city council, of course, but not a neighborhood council. And our main purpose is to deal with city issues. So we are a voice for our neighborhood, or supposed to be a voice for our neighborhood to the city council. That doesn't always happen. And I think it's important to know that neighborhood councils are very diverse. Like not not the people on them, but the ways that they work. Unfortunately, a lot of them are not diverse in the representation of the people they serve. But in terms of how progressive, how likely they are to want to make big changes for the city versus focusing on self-interest, there's a big variation there. And I definitely would say that my experience, or what I've seen so far, is that it's very rare that a neighborhood council like very well reflects its constituents, and that is not okay. That we should see a really deep reflection of our neighborhoods from the neighborhood councils, but they tend to be older, whiter, and more likely to be homeowners than the people in the area. And of course, this is true for like the voting population too, which is it's connected. So I got involved in neighborhood councils because after Trump's election, I wanted to get involved. I was a student. I still am a student, seemingly forever. I'm a PhD student in health policy, and I was doing some activism within the school system, local politics, and it felt like that was neighborhood rep, and then became vice president, and then this round ran for president and won. And I think I'll get into this more maybe with another question, but I ran with the slate. So I think if we're talking about elections, I definitely want to talk more about strategies. But for me, it's been an incredible experience, especially because our neighborhood council is very progressive, much younger, and everybody is on there for the right reasons. We have a collegial atmosphere. People disagree, but in a respectful way. And we've been able to get a lot done as far as policy, taking stands on different policies. We just passed a letter explicitly saying we support the defunding of the police. And we've been able to do, I think wouldn't have been possible if we weren't able to work together in that collegial way.
Thank you, Eryn. I think you both have talked about councils as their power in mobilization and in bringing local actors and voices together. I think just on a, before we continue, just on a super basic level, for somebody who doesn't come from, doesn't have a background in organizing or policy or activism, how would you suggest that that person get involved with their neighborhood council?
So first, 100,000% with what Eryn said. The I've been lucky enough to serve. So let me back up. There are a lot of official alliances within the DUN system. So one of them is the Alliance of Neighborhood Councils, and that was an eye-opener. That's where all the older Anglo homeowners from the San Fernando Valley really lobby hard to try and hold on to the past that we all know has worked for so few and is not working for virtually anyone these days. Echo Park, where I live, is over, I'd say we're about 64% renters. But when I first started going to meetings for my neighborhood council, it was clear to me that the majority who were on there were relatively new to my neighborhood and homeowners. So right away, I was suspicious of the gentrifying impact that was going to happen in their decisions. And I wasn't wrong in that. When you don't show up for these things, either as a stakeholder at meetings, as a member of committee, or serving on your board, basic things like bylaws are written by people that reflect their own agenda. I accept that everyone has an agenda, including me. Part of my agenda, though, is to include as many of my neighbors in these decisions as possible. And that's not always everyone's priority. That being said, on my neighborhood council, I have been able to persuade ever more people to examine our bylaws and our standing rules and pick apart the things that disenfranchise too many of our neighbors. Number one is which I want a permanent budget line for funding language justice. We have a huge number of people who may speak some English but are more comfortable speaking Spanish. And the idea that they would have to go through hurdles to be able to participate is outrageous to me. And our value as a neighborhood council is in how many people we can bring to the table. So if you want to get involved, the first place is show up. If there's not somebody in the audience that's calling them out and saying, who is this serving? How are you going to do this? How did you come to these conclusions? Things get passed, and not only are people not aware of it, but harm can actually be done. And if there has ever been a moment that is so critical for people to step up and be counted, that moment is now. Neighborhood councils need to start weighing in on things like stopping these mass evictions, making sure that rental justice or rent forgiveness, or however you want to put it, to prevent a quadrupling of our homeless population is important. But if we don't show up with our voices, there is no pressure in an organized way from city council that's on record holding them accountable. And organizing, that is key. If we can show that we can bring votes, that is important leverage that we cannot afford to squander or forfeit by being silent or feeling like we don't want to roll up our sleeves and really get down and dirty in the politics of it all. That's how stuff gets done here. And we just have to do it. We got to show up. We got to stand up. We got to speak up. Our neighbors are counting on us.
Thank you, Lauren. I think you brought up elections, and Eryn, you had mentioned we're elected on a slate. So I think that is a perfect segue to how do neighborhood council elections work? What is the actual, other than showing up for a meeting, which I know I have a couple times, how does somebody, other than lobbying a council, actually become a member of a council?
Yeah. So I would say, depending on which neighborhood council you would be going to, your strategy will probably be different. So if you're in Palms and you're progressive, just come talk to me or like somebody else on the council, and you'll probably find a good place for yourself, either on a committee or like right now we have 2 positions open. Actually, this is the first time we've had any positions open. Both Area B and Area E need representatives. So I would say, like, if you don't know what your neighborhood council is, figure that out. Is there a way to like link there's like an easy way to like find your neighborhood council based on your address. Go to a meeting first, feel it out. If they seem like welcoming and great people, you may just be able to start having a conversation with one of the board members. Email them, say you're interested. Maybe you can grab coffee virtually. That's not really a thing right now. And get involved in one of the committees. I think it really, since there are so many personalities on neighborhood councils, I think part of the decision-making process for anyone should be who they can get along with on the committees to a certain extent, just because you can only expend so much energy as a volunteer. And so it is nice to have someone who's going to support you and welcome you into this environment. So if there's whether or not you're interested in getting involved at different levels, there's committees. Anyone can join a committee. You don't have to be a board member for most of the neighborhood councils. Then you can also be appointed during the year. So for these two positions that we have open right now, people can submit their resume and a brief statement to me, and then we have like interviews during our executive committee, and then I will appoint someone during our next general board meeting. We meet once a month. The other way to get involved is to get elected, and that will happen, the elections happen this coming spring 2021. So I suggest, and what I would love to see is progressive groups running as a slate. So a slate is just you choose one person for each position, and you run as a group. Now, when people actually vote, they don't have to vote for everybody to vote for one person. Like a slate is an unofficial grouping, but it means that you can all pool resources. Fun fact, there are no campaign finance policies for neighborhood councils. So in theory, you could spend as much money as you want and not keep track of it. I don't suggest that, but because they're so small, there's no reporting of finances officially. And I really think that there are very few people who vote in these elections. It should be more. We had, in our neighborhood this last election, we have 45,000 people who live here, and we had 750 people vote in the election, and that was twice as many as we'd ever had before. So it's really a very small number. Like your win number, if you know like election terms, is very small. And it could be as much as just like as a slate, like getting everybody you know in that neighborhood to come out and vote that day. And that could be enough almost. So that's something that I'm like really passionate about, because I do think that as much as we want to push the people who are currently in neighborhood councils, and that's important, I think it's also important, that we have more people actually running and flipping these boards that are not fully representing their community and are not serving the purposes that I think neighborhood councils should be there for. And I think this is really important. Like neighborhood councils, I think, like when I tell people that I'm on one, sometimes people like laugh at me like, oh, it's a student government kind of thing, or, they don't see the power in it. But there is a lot of power in neighborhood councils, because you have a lot of relationships with the city council, and neighborhood councils, for better or for worse, do really pressure their city council people, because they are required to have a relationship with us. And the more that we are savvy and we push and we continue to ask for things, the more we get them. And that can be good if you're in a progressive area and like you have people that represent you well. But if it's not, then you have people with very loud voices who are saying things that could be very bad for humanity and like the basic rights of people in our area. So it is super important. I've seen with my own eyes the way that folks with their own self-interest have pushed those interests to the level of getting policies passed.
I just want to echo what Eryn said. That's right on the money. For me, I started out by building my relationships within the existing council as a member, an effective member of one of the committees. When I was eventually appointed, because if you're running for a seat that becomes vacant in between elections, the way that you get appointed is because people know you, and they'll pick somebody they know over a stranger. So that's the first thing. The second piece is that once you are on the board, negotiating relationships with people on the board to see where you can, it's practical. Count the votes for the things that matter to you. One of the first things that I did that turned out to be very smart, if I do say so myself, was that we had members of the community come to the neighborhood council, be rebuffed by a lot of the newcomers who had control of most of the votes on the board, but I alone, if you can believe that, went to them and asked them to please come back and kept in touch with them. And now those two people are on the board. And we have been able to form a voting bloc, not only to try and push things forward for the majority of our neighbors, but also as a recruiting tool for other people to get on the board. And we will be running as a slate in the upcoming by-election. To give you an idea why this is important, I watched as the majority on the board converted a number of district representative seats, community interest seats, got rid of the youth seat, all so they could create more at-large positions so that all the people living in the houses on the same block could run together. This is what happens when you're not there. They take control of the board, they rewrite the rules to favor themselves, and it can take you years to undo that. But the first start, like I said before, and I'm going to say it again, show up. Even if you can only go to meetings. And it's so easy now with Zoom. You can show up to committee meetings from the comfort of your own living room. This is so important because without pushback, the things that you fear most are going to come into fruition. And we have been, it took us 1.5 years to get safe parking. And the city still stalled on it, but we worked diligently to do that. It took us 1 year to get the church online to provide us the space for the mobile showers, to get the county to provide us with the mobile shower, to get that set up and get in it, but we got it done. And then built other services around it. So, you've just got to, like I've told a lot of people, this is a marathon, not a sprint, but it can be done and we're funded. And that money can help a lot. So come on, join us.
How much money does a neighborhood council, for those who might not know, how much money does a neighborhood council get from the city?
Well, we got, I want to say about $42,000. And from that, some of our operating expenses, our operating expenses come from that, right? We get some money, there's a pool for translators, but once that pool is exhausted, then you've got to pay for it yourself, which is why I'm insisting on a budget line. I want to be able to offer, I think we're obliged to offer language justice and set an example and just pay for that. And the balance of that, we'll do things like, right now, we're deciding between a survey, which I think is absurd. I would much rather, and I'm fighting that because I want that money that we would be giving to this survey, which we are probably not going to get responses from, to go to grants to food banks, which I think is a much more pressing need for our neighbors. And if I wasn't there, other people might not be speaking up, or, if there weren't enough of us to persuade them. So this is what I mean by the things that you think are important. If you're not there, it's not going to get done.
Thank you. So we have a few more minutes. I was going to ask folks if anybody has questions for Lauren and Eryn too. You can either, I would say maybe type them in the chat box in case, so we don't have overlapping voices, and we'd be happy to ask them. Yeah. Here we have I have a question from Caitlin, who says, I'm curious if Eryn or Lauren have any perspectives on neighborhood council's role in development and how we can be a check on gentrification, and also the role of neighborhood councils in alternative safe transportation.
I do on the development issue, because it's planning and land use. So let me back up for a minute. I'm not sure if folks are aware, but the definition of a stakeholder for the purposes of being on a neighborhood council is resident, you work for a business in the area, you own property in the area, or you own a business in the area. And so the broad use of stakeholders can allow those that may have a vested interest in seeing more development come into play. I've been dismayed at the number of things that I personally think shouldn't get passed. For example, we've recently, a development is coming forward. The neighborhood was against it, but the pluck committee the majority voted to take it to the board. I'm going to fight that, but once you get that endorsement, it's really kind of difficult to undo. Now, the funny thing is, developers don't have to come to us, and there is this thinking that if we keep saying no, they won't. I'm not so sure that that's true. If we're not pushing back against developers who are going to Ellis out my elderly neighbors, then what good are we? But planning and land use is hotly contested, and it often, even with stakeholders, it can be people who have a vested interest in seeing their property values go up rather than looking to make sure that people aren't displaced. So that's a big one.
And I can add on to that a little bit. So for sure, neighborhood councils are heavily involved in development, for better or for worse. And I think that there is it's a tricky balance, because there's gentrification as an issue, but then there's also the need to build affordable housing, or need to build housing as an issue. I think at the bare minimum, it's important that neighborhood councils know what's happening in the area, because otherwise developers can just kind of like do things without anybody making a fuss. So at the bare minimum, we've been able to ask developers to change the format of their units to add more 2 and 3 bedrooms for families, to make the facades on the outside look nicer, to make sure that there are native plants growing, and to add potentially more affordable units. I can't say that I have a good idea of like how to be most effective, but I definitely think it's an important role. I would say that for the alternative transportation options, we have this really cool organization that cropped up in the last year called Streets for All. It's run by someone who has been on his neighborhood council. His name's Michael Schneider. He's been on his neighborhood council for several years and really understands how to get folks to pass the same thing. So we have like the Safe Streets Initiative, or is that what it's called? Slow Streets, where there are streets that are kind of like unofficially shut down so that people can walk and bike on them, like residential streets. He and his organization were the ones that really got that going. And he did it by getting a bunch of different neighborhood councils to pass the same CIS, which is a community impact statement. And just, this is a very technical thing, but it is the way that neighborhood councils make a public comment on city council motions. So just the way that you can call in as a member of the public and make a public comment for whatever motion it is that's in the city council, neighborhood councils can write this like letter to the city council, and it's supposed to give us kind of like a seat at the table. And so that was one way of, there have been several of those specifically about alternative modes of transportation, better modes of safe transportation for bikers and walkers. And so I would definitely check out Streets for All if you're interested in that. I think it's a good model for any special interest to work.
Thanks, Eryn. I noticed you just mentioned community impact statements, and we have a question from Nancy. Can you explain in a detailed manner how the neighborhood council exerts pressure on the city council? She says, I know there are community impact statements, but what are other specific things that folks looking to get involved can ask for, or members of councils can ask for?
Yeah, so community impact statements is one. We also write letters. So if something is not officially part of the, like a city council motion yet, we can write a letter and submit it. A lot of it happens through relationships, I think, as any politics, any policy kind of stuff goes. It's really hard to say no to somebody when you're on the phone with them. And that's what I've found to be surprising. Like once we get, we just, we ask them to like set up a meeting, and if we have really specific asks and we're not taking no for an answer, and we have a lot of research to understand what we can and can't do legally, then it's really hard for them to say no to us. Like we just were able to, this is also connected with Streets for All. I think we've been able to get a protected bike lane on Venice, or something like that, like a temporary pilot project, but nothing was going to happen on Venice if we didn't ask for it. They are repaving all of Venice Boulevard, and there's a mobility plan that's supposed to be put into place, but it's only going to be put into place if people pressure them. And so we've been able to like talk on the phone with our city council people and actually get them to make changes that they wouldn't have otherwise done. So I think a lot of it, even though like I'm in CD5 with Corette's, and that's difficult, talking with his staffers and like having real trusting relationships with his staffers has made it possible for us to get things through that I don't think otherwise would have happened. And then of course there are the other times where it's like, okay, everybody, like we can tell our constituents to call about a certain issue. We just, unless we've passed something that says this is where we stand, we can't tell our constituents what to say, obviously. But when there are big issues in the city council, we usually put it on our social media to say like, hey, this is happening. If you care about this, call. And what we've found, especially in Corette's district, is that he at least says that he's basing his decisions on who's calling the most. And we know that who's calling the most is the wealthy white homeowners who don't have the same interests that most of the people in the area do. So that's another way.
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty much what Eryn's saying is how it's worked in my neighborhood council. In fact, I became known to the staff in CD13, which is Mitchell Farrell's district, as an individual long before I was associated with the neighborhood council, because I wanted some drug dealers off my block, and I just harassed them on a regular basis until I got a meeting with the senior lead officer to get them to do the patrols to make that happen. And it seemed to be a natural outgrowth for me then to move into the neighborhood council space. Having said that, it was with our concerted efforts, writing letters, calling, getting meetings, asking them, these staffers, to appear before the board, that we were able to get those things that were so important to our unhoused neighbors, particularly the support we needed from Mitchell Farrell's office to get the showers and to push through the safe parking, which was a critical need, and from our perspective, really easy, but it took a lot of hoops, and we needed the relationships with those staffers to help us guide us through that.
Well, thank you so much, Lauren, Eryn. I know we've got another guest coming on. I think you've both talked about a lot of victories, the challenges of neighborhood councils, how folks can get involved. I think because we're looking to mobilize people, and LA Ford has just launched a neighborhood organizing initiative that we think could be a great way for people in their own neighborhoods to make relationships, join together, and potentially run for neighborhood councils next year. What would you say, coming out of this teach-in, this meeting, whatever we want to call it, what would be the number one takeaway that each of you would like everyone listening to spread to their friends and family and going forward?
Get into those Zoom meetings. start listening in, and not just for the major board meetings, which, you know, fight through the boredom, but learn how to read an agenda, learn how what their timelines are, and then go to the committees that you're most interested in. Attend those virtual meetings. That'll give you an idea of where to step forward, and, you know, and do it gently. You don't have, Rome wasn't built in a day. Just keep in mind that general election is going to be in April, and there'll be a nice lead up to it. I don't know when they're going to have it. It'll probably be sometime in January, because this is the 20th anniversary, but usually there is a Congress of Neighborhoods that anybody can go to. That is a great place to start meeting fellow activists and to see the services that the city puts on. I'm going to guess that they'll have it sometime in January. And when that announcement comes out, sign up for it. It's downtown, they feed you, you get free parking, and it's the best. So obviously we need to be all safely be able to meet in a group, but that is a really good way to meet other activists and to get a little bit of the sort of the training seminars that they offer, especially if you feel like you'd like to have a little bit more formal grounding in how the neighborhood council works. That's a good step, but no time like the present. Start going to meetings.
Thank you, Lauren. And Eryn, your closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely echo everything that Lauren said. Definitely just go to a meeting. It is scary and it is intimidating. So if you feel that way, don't feel like that's on you. They are really weird. It's a government meeting, and there's all these, like, you know, they run with Robert's rules and everything. But once you realize that they're just people and there's a way to, like, navigate that system, then it becomes something that you can use as a tool. And it's something where you can learn it now, use it not just in the neighborhood council system, but in any of these open city state meetings. It takes a lot to make a public comment, but if you can get up the courage to do it, you're really making a difference, because people do listen. Like, a lot of the times we have like maybe 2 or 3 public comments on each motion. Like, it really makes a difference for me when I hear a bunch of people telling me the same thing. And I would say, like, the biggest takeaway is neighborhood councils exist. They do have a lot of power. And so it's important to get involved, because it's a very, it's a great tool to leverage in order to make change in Los Angeles. And there are a lot of ways to do it. So please get involved.
Thank you so much, Eryn and Lauren. It was wonderful to hear your perspectives. As someone with a little bit of experience, but not too much with neighborhood councils, I really appreciate your insights. And unfortunately, we don't have any more time for neighborhood council discussions, but I'm sure we will be doing more work on this in the future. And yeah, thank you so much again. And wanted to turn it over to David.
Great. Thanks so much, Seth. And thank you, Lauren and Eryn. It's been great to have you involved with LA Forward, and thank you for everything you've done before, during, and after that, and for sharing your insight with us. I think this is really just a start on the neighborhood council. We're just like dipping our toe into it. Part of what we're doing with neighborhood organizing is we're doing a lot of things. So part of it's we're trying to empower people to go go to neighborhood council meetings together to support one another, and then when to push councils together to do things, and then hey, maybe even run for office with our as on a progressive slate, and maybe we have even a citywide progressive slate. So I think there's a lot of possibilities. Now I want to turn to welcome Culver City Council member Daniel Lee, who I'll let him tell a little more of his own story, but longtime progressive, an activist, and got elected to Culver City Council the last couple of years, which is seen a lot of change, the council and the city. And yeah, really just want to welcome Daniel to first just introduce himself, and then share a little bit of his story of how he got involved, and then we'll talk about what the experience of being on council is like, and what he's learned and how to be effective. So welcome, Daniel.
Sure. Thanks for having me, David. Thanks, everyone, for making some time on a Sunday afternoon. I think I'll be really quick on the intro part so that we could get more into discussion. I was elected on the Culver City Council in 2018. the second time I ran. I lost in 2016 by about, I think the final vote was about 230 votes, but I only won by about 330 votes. So votes matter. Just to put that out there. I come from an organizing background. And about 8 years leading up, I've been working with the Sierra Club and the Sierra Club Clean Bird Committee, basically focused on closing down the Inglewood oil field systematically. But shortly after I was elected to the Culver City Council, we voted to close down the portion that was in Culver City. And that really happened because of the organizing that happened way prior to the election. I made it an issue in my 2016 campaign, which I lost. And I continued to make it an issue in the 2018 campaign, and so did other candidates. So based on the weight of organizing that had been going on for almost a decade, it was almost like our council didn't really have a choice, which, you know, people could have different opinions about, but I think positive pressure is a good thing. And I think really responding to the community is a good thing. And I think electing people who have been working with community for a very long time is also a good thing. Prior to that, I was very involved with the Occupy and 2011, 2012. Was very involved with Black Lives Matter. I Don't Know More, been arrested a couple times. One of the first things I actually did with not Occupy, but a group that I'm on the board of directors for, Move to Amend. We're advocating for an amendment to the Constitution that says corporations are not people and money is not speech. Our amendment in Congress is HJR 48. But one of the first things that we did is that we went to the South Robertson Neighborhood Council in Los Angeles and asked them to pass a resolution in support. We were tipped off by one of our supporters that then City Council member Eric Garcetti was floating a resolution that was not quite as strong as we liked. So we lobbied the South Robertson Neighborhood Council to make the resolution stronger, to call for a resolution that said corporations are not people and money is not free speech, rather than just addressing the Citizens United ruling, and addressed Buckley versus Vallejo and Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad. Two other not exactly obscure Supreme Court cases, but related to Citizens United. And as a result of the South Robertson Neighborhood Council actually passing the resolution, which was a very long and contentious meeting, the resolution was sent to the city attorney, who then contacted the South Robertson Neighborhood Council, and we used that to contact, I think it was Richard Alarcon at the time, Councilmember Garcetti, and some others to get our resolution before the full LA City Council. It was voted on December 6, 2011, and LA City was the first major city to call for a constitutional amendment to the Constitution around Citizens United and related cases, because of the steps that we took that started with the neighborhood council system. So it's a really good and effective way to show LA City Council representatives that you have community support, particularly if you have more than one neighborhood council. And it's a really good way to get information out to the most active activists and organizers in your community who might not already be educated on the intricacies of a particular issue. But just wanted to add that segue because it relates to my biography before we get into discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Daniel, for sharing that. I had no idea. Didn't know that backstory. So yeah, I mean, you know, so you had a hard-fought victory, hard-fought campaign to get on the council a couple years ago, and I'm really curious. You know, you were on the outside. You're an organizer. What has it been like being on the council? We have 88 cities in the county, and most of them are a lot more like Culver City. You know, under 100,000 people than LA City. So, what has it been like to serve? What has surprised you, and what have you seen? What's worked and what hasn't? And that's a lot of questions. So start wherever you want.
Well, I think the first fear that I had is a fear that's actually shared by a lot of people who want or who have thought about running for elected office but come from an activist or organizing background. And I think the biggest fear is around like compromise and how much you might change in particular by being elected. I think that fear is overblown a little bit in a small city context because we're small. But, you know, in Culver City, for instance, you know, we have Amazon studios coming in, we have Apple studios coming in, we have HBO setting up across the street, Symantec, and a bunch of other million and billion dollar companies. So it's not completely unfounded, but I think if you stay sort of true to your principles, you don't really have to make as much of a significant change as some people who come from an activist or organizing background think you might. I think there are a lot of good models out there, Karen Bass and Senator Holly G. Mitchell in particular, of people who have basically continued to be organizers after they were elected. So they're elected organizers. They aren't, it's not like they made a transition, like they became another person or they became another type of thing. They remain who they are. And I think in terms of concepts that people are pushing around these days, like co-governance, which I think is very important when you talk about progressives or people who are interested in things like participatory governance. The concept of co-governance is important. And if you come from an organizing background, you usually have a base. Either that's low-income people, that's environmentalists, there are people who are interested in women's rights, there are people who are interested in LGBTQIA rights. Across the board, you have a base that supported you, that made it possible for you to get elected. I think one of the most essential and important things to do after you're elected is to continue to have that relationship with that base, to continue to harvest ideas from them, to continue to create policies that align with their priorities. And I think if you do that, you can actually be more effective. When it comes to things like showing up on public comment, for instance, if you have a strong connection to your base and a particular issue comes up, you can call up this group of environmentalists and that group of environmentalists and that group of environmentalists. So when an issue comes before the city council, even if some of your colleagues are on the fence, they might be swayed by the 50 people that you brought out rather than, you know, the 100 sort of fake workers who come from the oil industry, but none of whom work in your city or none of whom work, you know, within 30 miles of your city, whose comments are very general and vague. The comments of people who are, you know, your stakeholders who live nearby and or, you know, who have business nearby, you know, they have more weight. So like continuing that relationship is essential, and it helps you sort of navigate the differences that you thought might appear between being an activist or an organizer and an elected. And I think this is, you know, obviously completely different depending on what type of elected position you're actually in. And it's much more effective at the local level. But that's where we can have the greatest effect in our current moment anyway. With the federal government being occupied by idiots, I would say, you know, Republicans or whatever else, but, you know, our president's an idiot and he surrounds himself with idiots. So in that context, the real work that we can do is local. To some degree it's state because we're in California, but we need to recognize that like a lot of the progressive moniker and badges that we wear in California are really for show. And there's a whole lot more that we can do and a whole lot more that we can change in California on the state level as well. I think I answered most of your question, but let me know.
Yeah, and then I'll try to be briefer. I'll try not to lay out 4 questions all at once next time. So thanks for that kind of in-depth look. I'm curious, you know, is there like a case study you can share, a case study or two of like where you were able to get something done at the council because of a certain set of tactics and strategies you all inside-outside game you followed, or on the flip side, is there something that didn't go as well as you would have liked, and what did you learn from that?
Well, one in particular that's going to be resonant in the next few months. I'm not completely certain, but in addition to being the first African American elected to City Council in Culver City, I think I'm one of the first renters. And Culver City for a very long time has not had rent control, but has been surrounded by cities that do, including Los Angeles and Santa Monica and even Beverly Hills. And there has been, this large push for property rights and a lot of libertarian nonsense that has forestalled any type of even minimal rent control in Culver City. So when I ran both times, I was very forthright with my opinion that, we should have rent control in Culver City because, we should have rent control everywhere. It's not a solution to the housing crisis, but it helps prevent displacement from being as profound as it is when gentrification comes into play. It's only one piece of an overall housing strategy, but it is an essential piece. So when some organizers in my community asked me to present like a rent control resolution, I was like, this would be better if it came from you, one. I'm an African-American person. I'm the first African-American elected to this body. Our city's still racist and we are not honest about it. Two, I'm a renter, and a lot of our thinking around renters is very racialized, and we're not honest about that either. So if this instead came from local community groups that are led but not led partially by white people, but not exclusively led by white people, then that might be better for a certain part of our electorate, which is in the middle, to stomach. One of the other things I capitalized on, I did my master's at UCLA in 2015. We have a lot of UCLA professors who live in Culver City. A lot of them are my friends. And shortly after I was elected, I sort of convened a brain trust of about 15 of them for brunch to talk about what they're working on, what they think their priorities for the city should be, and how what they're working on could complement policy in the city. And even if they were in the law school, the School of Education, the School of Social Work, School of Sociology, Anthropology, etc., everybody said housing. And as a result, we mobilized some of the data that people had actually been working on to connect it to some of the groups like the Culver City Community Coalition, the Culver City Action Network, Protect Culver City Renters, and one student of Pavel Monkinen, who's a UCLA professor in the School of Urban Planning and on our General Plan Advisory Committee. His student also worked on the Prop 10 campaign to try to repeal Costa-Hawkins. So I connected him with our local community groups to give them messaging and research guidance and to push that forward. So last year, they successfully organized the council to pass a rent freeze with the ultimate goal of bringing permanent rent control to Culver City. And I think that worked in the context and the sequence that they did it because it came directly from the people. It sidestepped any potential racism that might have been in play if I presented it myself. And it sort of put pressure on my colleagues without me being the person putting pressure on my colleagues. I'm very happy to do that. I have no problems with that. I think people who know me know I don't really care about that. I was going to say something else. But I think having it come from the people is much more inspiring, one, to my colleagues, but to the community in general. So we ultimately passed a rent freeze. We're actually having a meeting this Thursday to put our final guidelines in place for rent control in Culver City. But then we're also fighting a ballot initiative of our adversaries that was organized for November. So in November in Culver City, rent control is on the ballot to some degree. because apartment owners and other folks organized against our temporary rent freeze. So we're still working on how things will finally look. But it was very instructive and encouraging to have our residents and stakeholders, many of whom were homeowners, who were just empathetic, organized to push us to do what Culver City probably should have done 15 years ago. Or 30 years ago.
Yeah. Thank you for exploring that with us. Want to give folks a chance to ask some questions. If you could just put it in the chat, since we have like 50 plus people on. Feel free to pop a question in the chat. One thing I think, and maybe this is something that Lauren, as people are thinking about what their questions are, especially we have the privilege of having Daniel here. As a council member with the, council members and cities have a lot of power, a lot more power than neighborhood council members. So even if he doesn't represent you in Culver City, think about what you might want to know in terms of if you live in another small city. And I think a lot of that experience can be transferable. I guess my question, which I'll ask because I'm not seeing anything else pop up, and maybe Lauren and Eryn can talk about this too, which is like, what does an effective public comment look like? How, governments are required legally in California to have public comment by the Brown Act and other things, but how can people make theirs as effective as possible? And on the flip side, what doesn't work in a public comment? Maybe you can start with that, and maybe I'll give Eryn and Lauren a chance to talk about it after you.
Sure, and I can answer the one question in the chat again after this brief comment on public comment. But for me, if you're gonna get on public comment, identify what the problem is very succinctly and specifically. Identify what you think the proposed solution is, and identify, like the discrete ask. Maybe the discrete ask might not be the same as the solution because it might be restrained by budget to some degree. But like, if your problem is, I don't know, parking enforcement is, inconsistent on Washington. The South Side is much more ticketed than the North Side, and I have the numbers. If you say you have the numbers, one, have the numbers. Don't just say that. I feel like a lot of people come on public comment and they say things very authoritatively, but they don't actually provide numbers. Like if you provide background and research to, at least my city council members in LA, and in Culver City, I can't speak for other city councils, but we will actually read what you send, and we'll be like, oh, well, I got this from my constituent, and it says this. I did my own research to verify it. Can we look into this? And we as city council members can direct staff to say, look into this, incorporate this into whatever type of policy proposals you bring back to us, XYZ. If you come, you have a legitimate concern, but all you do is yell at us and you don't outline the specifics of your concern, that's hard to move on. We might, recognize your concern as legitimate based on, other people's past concerns, because a lot of things that come up to us are normal. It's like, this construction company is doing a development. Their hours are supposed to be like 9 to 5. They come in at 8. What's up? Like, if you say it like that, that's fine. Like, that's, justified anger. But if you come in with like, expletives and you're just like, like that can be not just off-putting, but it can also prevent you from providing some of the data that you probably have to us. If you're just saying, hey, why don't you do X, Y, Z and blah, 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 but it's not supported by the data that you already have, then, it can prevent things from happening. And you can send us an email. But even in this Zoom, and we use WebEx, but like this virtual context, the public comment is more effective partially because you do not just tell us what's going on, you tell the greater community what's going on. And there might be someone who has the same concern as you, who's like, hey, I had that concern too. I wasn't going to say anything about it. I was here to talk about something else. But now that I know you have the same concern, I'm going to reach out to you and maybe we can work on this together. So I would say that. But there was just one short thing I wanted to address in the questions. When it comes to stakeholders for at least Culver City Council, it's much more general and broad. So our stakeholders are both our residents and our business owners, but also much more generally the people who utilize Culver City public services, whether that be parks and rec, whether that be the private things provided by restaurants that are in downtown Culver, whether that be just people who normally walk in Culver. We're surrounded by Los Angeles on all sides. So a lot of the people who actually bring most of the revenue into our city, whether they be workers who come in and swell our population by 2 to 3 or 4 times each day, or just people who come here for fun, for food and things like that, don't live in Culver City. They don't have a business in Culver City. So we count those as stakeholders. And in terms of the number of emails and public comment, and I'll stop at this and we can move on to others. I think as many as possible. Like, I think it's much more profound, like I said, not an email, if you actually get on public comment and if you all do not say the same thing. What we see with emails is, like when we passed our ban on flavored tobacco, we got, I would say, 3,000 to 4,000 emails from industry and industry-related folks who asked us not to ban. And at a certain point, it becomes background noise. When industry and specifically small businesses that actually are located in Culver City say, I understand this ban, I object to it because XYZ, I wish you would do XYZ for small business owners like me, that resonates more. That's more of like, I actually do live in your city. I am not represented by a lobbying group. I am only asking for this very specific thing. And then, once this policy that you're putting in place is in place, I will comply. That's much more effective and that's much more personal. If everything's just very general and everybody's sending the same email, it doesn't work. And calls and actual public comment are the best way to go.
Thank you for sharing that. I think there are so many nuggets there in what you said. I mean, I think I was on my neighborhood council in West LA, and I've obviously seen a lot of other government meetings, and it's like, if you come in starting with the yelling at the elected official, it doesn't really work because then they shut down. They're people. Even if they were sympathetic before, even if they're still sympathetic, like, okay, if the more that you cannot sabotage yourself and start off like, why is this hurting me? And then like, why is this issue affecting me personally? And then talk about a proposed solution, you're in a better spot. And if you can get everybody to do that, like you're saying, it's really powerful because you're having people who are different from one another sharing their common issue. And it's, I think you really, I think that nugget oftentimes really gets lost. I want to,
David,
Eryn?
do you mind if I comment here?
I was about to say.
So I am in the unique position of actually having lobbied successfully Culver City government. Hey, Daniel. And I did this as part of a national campaign that I've been working on. And I use basically the techniques that David laid out, with one exception, which is that I started by pitching the idea to one particular council member and sought his suggestions about the best approach to bring it to Culver City Council, and then pretty much followed them to a T. And when I showed up for that public comment period, I had my dossier ready for it with enough copies for the city clerk to pass out to all the board members. And I had basically the bullet points prepared so that I was able to take advantage of the very short time that they gave me to speak, but to make my point coherently, and ultimately it was successful. As somebody who's done public comment in front of the city, one of the best things about public comment, even when, in this case, the city council didn't listen to me or any of the other activists who were gathered there, was that a coherent public comment from multiple perspectives brings the press. And in this case, I took the day off of work in order to go down to City Hall to protest the criminalization of homeless people sleeping in their cars. And the city council was so embarrassed, they voted silently. And in our outrage, the press was already there, but in our outrage, which was really spontaneous, a lot of us were able to get our comments into the public sphere through the press. And so in that sense, being prepared to give a coherent public comment, knowing what you want to talk about, and then being able to pivot to the press if it's available, are really, really effective ways of pushing forward the things that you most care about. Would you agree with that, Daniel?
Yeah, and I would say also, if you have some sort of organizational framework like LA Forward, if you could send out a press release from that organization and, you know, be available. As I said, when we did our when we did our proposal for the LA City Council in 2011, it was during the height of Occupy, so there was a lot going on. But the same thing is true now that was then. Like, a lot of local news, especially in LA, they're looking for a story. They're always looking for a story. And that type of story, which is separate from other journalists, because I don't want to impugn journalists, they will just, you know, repeat what you said sometimes, you know? Like, if you have a really cogent press release that's well written, or if you're like, hey, I'm here to comment, or I can be on video, or blah, 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 they will come to you. They will do a video, they will do an audio interview, they will reprint your press release verbatim. Like, it doesn't always happen, but a lot of times, you know, people leave that out and they only do social media. You got to do both.
Yeah, great. Eryn, anything on you from that? And then I'm going to get to some of these questions that have been popped on the chat.
Sure. Yeah. So I have learned a lot from this. I really appreciate what everyone has discussed so far. I would say just a kind of explanation, if you haven't done public comment before, for neighborhood councils, and I assume for the city council too, we have something called general public comment at the beginning, which means that it's something, if you want to say something to the council that's not related to what's on the agenda, you can take a small amount of time to say something. For any public comments, the board is not allowed to like discuss with you when you give the comment. So it's really just like it's a statement that just kind of like hangs in the air. I would say the strategy for public comment depends also on how controversial the issue is and how many people are on both sides. So for really controversial, really high issues that are like very focused right now, like the issues about the budget that had to do with police reform, there were a lot of people commenting. So when you're commenting, number one, don't take your full amount of time if you don't have to. People will appreciate it if you add something to what's already been said, and you don't take time just because you have it, because those meetings last forever if everybody takes that the time. But also sometimes it's just important to say something. Like, there are a lot of times when we don't have anybody comment on a motion, and it is helpful to just have, if you have anything that you can add, like any information that you have on this issue. Sometimes it's not controversial, but it's helpful to have community input. And so you don't have to necessarily come in like with anger, but sometimes that's helpful. I will say personally, as a president of the neighborhood council, sometimes people are mad at the things that I do, and I change my mind because they're upset with me, and I think their idea is really valid. But they're not attacking me as a person when they're doing that. They are visibly frustrated by what's happened, and then they give a clear solution. So I do think that you don't have to hide that you're upset about something by any means, but that it's important to attack the issue and not the person, unless that's all you want to do. You know, sometimes I'm sure that's appropriate, but if you want to really take a stance on an issue, it's better to really focus on the issue and not attack the people, because we're all just sensitive humans up there being yelled at.
Well, yeah, and I would just add, like, I know, like, a lot of us have thick skin just because, or, you know, thick skin for the length of the meeting, because we know what to expect. But if you can, like, you know, express your frustration in a way that's very policy and issue focused, that resonates, and that, you know, inspires other people's empathy.
Yeah. No, thank you all for sharing that. And I just want to bring up something Godfrey dropped in the chat, which is, yeah, even better if you can meet with public officials before public comment, establish a relationship, share your story, discover about what they're interested in, how they think about issues. You know, you don't want to be coming to them only when you need them to do something tomorrow. You know, if you can have an ongoing relationship, you know, established when you don't necessarily need something from them, and you just want to get to know them and understand where they're coming from and share where you're coming from, it's really powerful. That's true of life in general, but people forget about it when it comes to politics. And, you know, we want to, at LA Forward, we're going to be doing a lot of neighborhood organizing, and part of it is we'll be getting together with elected officials collectively, so you don't have to do it on your own. And there's, you know, I always say that you don't have to do things with LA Forward, but if you can find a group of people to act with, whether that's a press release or whether that's a meeting or whether it's public comment or whatever, like, do that. It's really important. And it doesn't have to be LA Forward, but you're always welcome here.
I wanted to, if I can, just address one of the questions. It said, if my neighborhood council has held events in support of the police but has said nothing about Black Lives Matter, then how can we influence them to make a statement? I think that sort of depends on the composition of your neighborhood council to some degree. I think in this moment, no matter where you are on the political spectrum, there is an acknowledgement that there needs to be more discussion around public safety. And I think in the Los Angeles area, that is fairly well acknowledged. So if you can, you know, if you can find a way to make the conversation about public safety, I think that's the most effective way to go. Because in my experience, and the thing that I've been saying over and over again for, like, I guess the last 2.5 months, is when I was first elected, I met with our police chief and our fire chief. And since my master's is in social work from UCLA, I asked them about the possibility of bringing social workers into our police and fire department for emergency response, like in 2016. And they both told me that over 50% of their calls were mental health or mental health related. And they were both very into the idea. And these are not like liberal to progressive people. Like, they are people who respond to data. And most of the police organizations that exist in the country that are not, like, you know, super ideological, know that a whole lot of their calls are mental health related, and a whole lot of their calls are things that, frankly, police officers don't want to do. So in the conversation between police reform and police abolition, I usually like to tell people, okay, where do people agree? And the center point is always both police and people who are calling for police abolition believe that police officers should not have to do homeless enforcement, mental health advisement, you know, a long list of things. So what is the future that we can envision where that doesn't happen? Like, that's the conversation, you know, like, can you get people to agree around the basic things that police officers themselves and police chiefs themselves have been saying for decades? This should not be our job, is what I've heard. Well, how can we make that not your job? That's what we're talking about.
Thank you for sharing that. And to your point, Nadia, you know, it's unlikely that they're going to go from, you know, doing events in support of the police to, like, putting out a statement in favor of Black Lives Matter. You can try, and I think there's sometimes, even if it's an uphill battle, there's something to be learned. You can learn a lot by going to them and saying, you know, I wrote this resolution, and you want to try to find an inside ally. This is true for a city council, county supervisors, or the Congress, or it's true for your neighborhood council. If you can find an ally on that body, and you can work with them and say, hey, I have this idea for a resolution in support of Black Lives Matter. movement, you know, will you consider passing it? And then as you try to do it, it may actually not go anywhere. And you may learn, well, okay, you'll learn something from that. You'll learn who are the obstacles, and you'll learn who are your allies and who are the neutrals. And it's a learning process. But the other thing is to be strategic. Like, why do you want them to make a statement in favor of Black Lives Matter in general? Maybe the statement is instead you want to make put out the same thing that Palms and a dozen other neighborhood councils did, which is we support defund the police. We support moving money from the police department to services and all these other things. And so that's a very concrete policy ask, which might be easier, and you can just, you know, then you can rely on what happened in other neighborhood councils. So yeah. There are a couple other things I want to get to, and then we'll close up. One from Aparna is, how do we get opinions from those who will never show up to public meetings or even get a temperature read if they don't have fully articulated opinions or don't know enough to formulate an effective policy position? So anybody can take that. Daniel or?
Sure, I'll jump in. And like, I feel like that's more basic organizing. A lot of that is sort of one-on-one. Like if you already have a relationship with people, obviously you can just ask them, what do you think about X? But if you don't, then like, you know, there are a lot of one-on-ones that you can have from people that you know from other social connections. You know, a lot of people know each other, you know, because of book groups. Like there are a lot of Zoom groups that are happening because of social isolation, but none of those groups, at least not well, okay, most of the things that I've been a part of have been political, but like none that I've heard about are really dissected from this current moment. So you bringing up what's happening in the current moment, it should not be controversial. And that current moment usually relates to their personal experience, whether, you know, one of the things that we talk about here and one of the things that we tried to make clear in Culver City this year is that, you know, for our boards and commissions, like, you know, resident stakeholders and undocumented residents can serve on all our boards and committees. That's actually a California state law. It's up to specific municipalities to make sure that that's more well known. But we took steps to do that this year. But if people don't actually know, like a lot of people, you know, who are undocumented, for instance, don't come to city council meetings, you know, like they don't come to neighborhood council meetings. Like there's a fear of enforcement, there's a fear of ICE, you know, and, you know, a lot of young children are taught to avoid law enforcement at all costs, you know, around deportation fears. But if you already have a pre-established relationship, one, you can tell people what's going on. You can give people, other people in power's email addresses, or you can relate their story by proxy, which is effective. I mean, don't get me wrong. Anytime you're relating anything by proxy, people will be like, did you just make this up? But, you know, people will be like that anyway. Like I've related a number of stories of my interactions with the Culver City Police Department and some unnecessary things that I experienced. And people, you know, pretended that I made it up, and I'm like, if you know me well, you know I don't lie. But like, I think, you know, one, if you already have a pre-established relationship, just say, hey, these are the ways that you can, you know, relate if you're comfortable via email, via phone, etc. If you're not comfortable, I can serve as your proxy. But if you don't already know people, you know, establish that one-on-one relationship and work towards those other goals once that one-on-one is actually, you know, once you're on a firm ground, once you're on a firm setting, like, you know, when it comes to people in oppressed situations, it's very hard to know when, you know, they are ready or they are comfortable without just asking.
Thank you. So we've gone over time, but everybody seems interested, so we'll definitely wrap up the next couple minutes. I think there's that question, Aparna, you asked and followed up on is like, and there's another question here about from Nira about what is an idea of a relationship between a council member and unions, of corporate special interest groups, how much power do council members have to operate against those groups? And I think all of these questions are actually tied together, which is like, you know, there's this idealized thing of like, well, I think to your question, Aparna, like there's a bunch of people who are disengaged. Whose job is it to engage them to see what they want to, know? Is that the government's job? And I would say it is, but actually, if we're talking about co-governance, a lot of it's the job of organizers, of movement organizers, right? And, organizing is notoriously underfunded. So I would tell everybody who's trying to figure out like the exact way, in the kind of ivory tower to figure out, okay, what are people's actual opinions? Like fund organizers in communities, and they will do that work of holding house meetings and doing one-on-ones and surfacing issues and pulling people in. And I think, that kind of tactic, whether it's from the civil rights, the Black freedom movement, or from the farm workers movement, or the Obama campaign did it beautifully in 2008. There's many other examples with organizing, but like I think to really to make sure the people's voices are heard, the public, it's about doing organizing at scale and really getting people engaged civically, not in kind of like mediated through technology exclusively, but actually by intentionally forming relationships and giving people opportunity to voice their concerns. And to the extent possible that government can facilitate that, great. But part of it's just like, what can we do to, as citizens, and I mean that not in the legal sense, but in the political sense of people who have a stake in our society, like what can we do to make sure more voices are being included in deliberations? So that's me on my high horse. Anything you want to share? Anything else you want to share, Daniel? You're very generous with your time. Want to give you an opportunity, kind of a closing statement or anything else you'd love to share with this group of folks.
Sure. I think we have a unique opportunity in LA County, not just LA City, but like a lot of other municipalities. Like our residents basically gave us a 90-day timeline to reconsider the future of public safety in Culver City. I pushed to increase our public safety budget so that we can have 7-day-a-week mental health coverage and possibly, still working it out, mental health first responders. But there are a lot of other things that sort of work into that, like a lot of things that cause problems when it comes to public safety are around either disability or language barriers. And those language barriers extend beyond public safety. And we're a county that it's very mixed when it comes to language. It's not just Spanish. Like I was surprised in our neighborhood in Culver City. I think the first 3 languages were English, Spanish, and I think it was it was one language that I did not anticipate. I had anticipated either Farsi or Japanese, because we have a very large Japanese community that goes back to the internment camps. We have a very large Farsi community. We have a very large Brazilian community in Culver City, but we're a very diverse county in general. And so our public service should be as accessible as possible to everyone, not just to English speakers, and not just to people of a certain level of ability. So I think when we talk about public safety, when we talk about governance, when we talk about like interaction and civic participation, we need to be talking about those things too. I wanted to also say, getting folks to engage at all is, to our partner's question, it's always a big problem, because one of the things that I lament as someone who has trouble sometimes with being too empathetic is that a lot of other people who are not that way are only affected or only move to action when something like affects them personally, like it could be raining bullets like all over the world or something. And until someone gets shot in the hand, they're like, oh, we need to do something about this bullet problem. Even though they see bullets hitting everyone else, and that's crazy. I think we need to work to a way, and one of the things that I've been pushing over the years is to show people how the effect on other people affects you. And there is a great book called The Spirit Level. It is not a spiritual book. It is basically a compendium of research that focuses on how more equal and equitable societies do better on a whole lot of different measures: mental health, physical health, well-being, financial measures as well. And I feel like it's been most effective to me when I'm talking to people who don't want to be engaged about things that don't necessarily affect them in the moment, to show them how they ultimately affect them in a systematic way. I think in this current moment, we have an opportunity to go beyond that. Because in the current moment, thanks to Black Lives Matter, partially thanks to this horrible pandemic, we see every day how much our individual actions affect everybody that we encounter. So it's easier to make those connections to things that people were, their brains weren't, quite there before. So I would take this opportunity to use these conversations around police brutality and white supremacy, around public health and the need to wear a mask to protect others as people wear a mask to protect you, to talk about the broader societal concerns and the communal nature of governance, or what some of us think should be the communal nature of governance. So I think like having those broader conversations right now is an incredible opportunity, and I thank LA Ford for continuing their work in the virtual realm, because I think they're really feeding into these broader conversations that get people thinking in that broader context. Like, think about we. I know Bernie is not still in the running, but not we. I mean, not me, us. I mean, that resonated with so many people, because that's how so many of us thought that we should think collectively. And that's how I feel like we've been sold to think that the US thinks in general, we the people. But in terms of policy, in terms of action, in terms of practice, that's never been the case.
Thank you so much, Danielle. What I'm wishing, if I'd been smarter, I would have had one session with Eryn and Lauren and a whole nother with you, Daniel. But so we'll have to bring it back. This was great. I'm glad we took a bunch of time to really dive in. So thank you to all of you who participated.
David, could I just interject here for a minute?
I just need to wrap up in the next 2 minutes to have a phone call.
Yeah. If everybody on this call who already isn't involved in their neighborhood council goes to a meeting, signs up for a committee, or runs for neighborhood council, you are modeling the change you want to see. And I think modeling the behavior and the outcomes we want is the first and probably the best step forward to engaging the people that we are hoping to recruit to our respective causes. Give them an example to follow. And I'll just leave it there.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Eryn. So grateful for all of your involvement and all you do in the city and beyond. And yeah, thanks to all of you. I had listed on the agenda checkout. I'm not going to do a question because there's still 40 of us. So yeah, thank you. And really glad everybody was able to be here with us. And if you are interested, if you weren't able to attend a neighborhood gathering, virtual neighborhood gathering, you kick off our organizing together, please feel free to email me. You definitely have all my email addresses, and or email Godfrey and or Seth or whoever, and we really look forward to organizing with you, building relationships. This isn't a solo mission. We're going to be doing this together with people you get to know and in your own neighborhood. So really appreciate your presence here, and hope you all have as good a week as possible. I'll see you guys later.
Have a good one.